After the British Grand Prix, it became very apparent to me and to basically everyone that, to cut to the chase, McLaren and Lando Norris especially just aren't ready. If we look at the British Grand Prix in isolation, which I'm still over the moon that Lewis won. Like, don't worry, guys. I'm gonna be rubbing this one in for years to come. I'm never gonna forget this win. But just looking at that win or that not win for McLaren, look at Oscar Piastri. He started in like P5, managed to get himself when that McLaren had serious pace in that transition period between slightly wet and or between dry and slightly wet. That McLaren had serious pace, absolutely blitzing the Mercedes. Lando started to build a decent gap. When it came to get into the pits, they didn't pit Oscar, which cost him, it cost him the race. It cost him a full pit stop in basically a lap, which ended his race. So, I mean, there's nothing else to say. McLaren did that on Oscar. Other than that, Oscar drove a brilliant race. And despite McLaren wanting him or giving him the option to go on softs, he was adamant and made the right choice that mediums were the better tyre to go on. Went on the mediums, and he nearly overtook Norris, which just goes to show because Norris essentially had a pit stop gap on him. So that just goes to show how much of a good race Piastri had and how good those medium tyres were. Going over to Norris, okay, the first mistake was obviously not pitting in time in terms of the crossover period to dries. And the second mistake was copying Lewis and going onto softs. I'm not sure, in fact, that's a lie. I'm very certain, in fact, that if Lewis went on a hard instead of softs, Norris wouldn't have gone on softs. He would have gone on mediums because the mediums seem like the better tyre. And I'm pretty sure if Mercedes went for the hards, it wouldn't have performed for them like it would have for Red Bull. But I'm so flabbergasted that nobody in that McLaren team decided to go, let's do what's smart instead of copying everyone else. Because although the Mercedes had pace and the Red Bull had some pace, I think it was pretty clear that it was between the Red Bull and the Mercedes. Verstappen put in an incredible shift, which you're going to talk about later. But Verstappen put an incredible shift in to get that P2. But let's not act like he was in a P2 car. He wasn't. Had things gone not horribly, Lewis P1, Norris P2, Piastri definitely had a better car than him in P3, P4, in P3. George Russell DNF, that's already P4. So we're talking P5 that Verstappen should have got, realistically. But because of obviously McLaren's blunder and the Mercedes of George Russell getting a DNF, that made that, and the fact that he outdrove, what's his name, Lando. Yeah, Verstappen got a very hard fought P2. But back to Lando, I don't know why Lando has these outrageous calls for strategies. I'm trying not to laugh, but you don't understand how happy I was as a Lewis fan when I saw him put on softs. Because in my head, I'm like, someone needs to be fired. Someone needs to be fired. Let's cut to the chase. This is a Ferrari strategy. If Ferrari did this, everyone would clown them for weeks. But for some reason, McLaren have got away with doing repeat blunders and Norris doing repeat blunders. Usually it's the driver that's trying to do the right call and the team is messing them up, or at least in Ferrari's case. But it's Norris just doing himself dirty. Like, I don't get it. Did no one think, wait a second, the mediums are in fact the better tyre? Because think about it. I'm not saying he would have definitely won with the medium tyre. All I'm saying is that if Verstappen on the hards and being like 10 seconds behind Lewis managed to catch up to 1.2 seconds, he would have been in DRS. Lando would have definitely got within DRS of Lewis for one, and he would have been able to at least stay in DRS a lot longer. So it would have given him a great chance to overtake, an amazing chance to overtake. And not only was that his mistake, I guess he made 3 mistakes. He came into the pits at the wrong time, which I guess is kind of his call because he should be telling the team, look, it's dry enough to pit. The team made a bad call and he made a bad call for the medium tyre. And lastly, when he did get the soft tyre on, instead of nursing it in, because obviously if you watch the timing screens, in the first 3-4 laps of that last stint on soft tyres between Lewis and Lando, Lando was cutting like half a second, 6/10 out of Lewis. And I'll be honest, I thought, wow, that McLaren's got some serious pace. So Norris is pushing really, really, really hard. And he was pushing really, really, really hard. Because although they'd both been told they need to ease the tyre in to make sure it lasts, and even then it might still not last, Norris just went full guns blazing, it times to overtake, and he just started setting qualifying laps. And long behold, he got it from about 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds, down to about 2.2, 2.1 seconds. And you thought, okay, he could be close to DRS in like a lap or two. And then Lewis matched his time, and it was, yeah, he immediately faded away because he didn't want to manage his tires, which I guess is the third mistake for him. And someone's got to start asking these questions. Lando Norris has one win to his name in Miami. And before I start talking about Lando like this, I just want to say, if you guys have been watching me for a while, you know that I actually backed Lando to be the one, to be able to dislodge Max out of that new breed of drivers of Leclerc, Russell, Norris. Like, I backed Lando to be that driver. Not only because I think he's very quick, but because I actually thought McLaren were competent. But clearly I'm not always right, because Lando's only win, guys, came from, let's not lie here, he had the fastest car on the day, by far, not even a question. He pulled out 7 seconds on Verstappen. He had the fastest car in the day, and he still needed a safety car to get the win for himself in Miami, right? Now, if we look at different Grand Prix, like Imola, see, it's starting to escape me now, but I'm sure I'll probably list some on screen. He has fumbled a win or two, you know? If you look at Canada as well, I think Canada was slightly more unlucky, but if you look at Canada as well, Canada was very winnable for Norris. So was Imola, really and truly. You know, he waited till the last second, and then all of a sudden the pace came. So, you know, these are winnable Grand Prix. And in a time in which, let's not forget Austria, in which, although the incident in Austria was Max Verstappen's fault, which I fully agree it was Max Verstappen's fault, if you're Lando Norris, you must be smarter. If you have a faster car with fresher medium tires, and that Red Bull is struggling and Max is putting in dangerous moves to try and defend, you need to be patient. Go slightly wide if you need to go slightly wide, right? To back out of the move if you need to back out of the move. He had far and away enough laps to get Max Verstappen cleanly, but he desperately wanted to get the move done as quick as possible, diving down the inside, not yielding at all, and eventually they crashed. And although it was Max's fault, at the end of the day, Max scored points that day, Lando didn't. So, you know, you can tell me, who would you rather be? But all in all, if you look at this whole thing, Max is the one benefiting. And I want to take a point to mention Max and Lewis as well, since Lewis has decided to remember who he is again since the car is race winning. Lando not only could have won that race, but I think is starting to really show the difference between boys and men, or really championship contenders and people who aren't quite championship material. Sorry to draw out Charles, but in 2022, Charles had a mixture of, you know, bad strategy, car blowing up, but he also had a lot of mistakes as well that kind of showed that he wasn't quite on the level of Max, even if he had, you know, better reliability or slightly better strategy. Stuff like France just rings into your head. Imola rings into your head of just times where you start to go, maybe he isn't quite there. You know, maybe he isn't quite there. And I'm not saying Verstappen's perfect, but these are mistakes that are clearly costing these drivers in terms of a championship battle and winning individual races. And it makes you think, when a driver is coming up, they have so much potential. And you hear this said about Yuki Tsunoda a lot. They say, oh, Yuki Tsunoda is doing great in AlphaTauri, but stick him in a Red Bull and he'll crumble under the pressure. Well, I don't think that just applies to Yuki Tsunoda. I think that applies to, let's use Carlos Sainz as an example. In 2022, when they had a championship contending car, Carlos Sainz was nowhere. Now that they're in upper midfield again, trying to climb back, Carlos Sainz is doing brilliantly. He's doing amazing. You know, Charles, he's doing great performances. But when they had a championship winning car, sometimes it fell off a cliff a little bit. It seems like sometimes drivers, even Sergio Perez is struggling now. But for those of you who've been fans of Sergio Perez's career for a while, you would know that Sergio Perez, historically, aside from his Red Bull stint in his career, has been known as a very quick, reliable driver that always gets great results for the team. So it seems like some drivers are just cut out to be ahead, are just cut out to be at the front of the grid. When, well, I'd say conversely, Lewis Hamilton has had probably the worst stint in his career at this point, and it's been in a midfield car. It's been in a midfield car. But we all know, give Lewis Hamilton championship winning material, and Lewis Hamilton's making less mistakes. Like it's so weird to say that, but these guys are essentially the opposite of what Lewis is doing right now. Lewis's worst stint in his career, or worst time, has been in a mediocre car. It's been in a mediocre car. But give him a car, or give him a car that can roughly fight, and it's almost like something wakes up, like, oh snap, like I'm going to win now. There's no if buts or maybes. There's no mistakes. Lewis was very decisive on the radio about what he wanted. What time to come into the pits. He was very on it, and people have questioned. I have maybe. Well, actually, no, I didn't question, but people have questioned his commitment when the car was a bit mediocre, saying that maybe he's not as focused. But as soon as the car is even within a sniff of victory, you can almost see his ears prick up, like, oh, it's time to win. And maybe Lando just isn't cut out. I'm not saying he definitely isn't cut out to win. All I'm saying is that if Lando had because obviously we know that Verstappen started the season with a better car. If Lando had started the season with a car equal to Max, he would still be probably around this deficit behind Max. He probably would still be this deficit behind, because he just simply makes the mistakes. He simply makes the mistakes. And it's so weird, because when Max was coming against Lewis, although he did make some mistakes, he wasn't like this. He really wasn't like this. He was mature when he needed to be mature. When he needed to bag points and he had the fastest car in the day, like Austria, like Styria, like Monaco, like all these different races, he bagged the win. He bagged the win. There was no emphatic driving. There was no, crazy strategy calls. He did exactly what he needed to do in the race, which was a boring, they weren't boring races, but he drove a very straightforward, boring race to get the victory. And he only really pulled out the fireworks if you're talking about Italy, if you're talking about, Silverstone wasn't him, if you're talking about Brazil, if you're talking about Saudi Arabia, when he didn't have the fastest car. But when Max had that car to fight, he, generally speaking, tried to keep it as clean as possible and tried to keep it as straightforward as possible, because he was mature enough to, or at least advanced enough, and Red Bull were advanced enough to realize that, okay, like, this is how you do it. And maybe that is probably the case now that I think about it, because Red Bull have a lot of their team being there with Sebastian Vettel, who did win a lot in the 2010s. And a team like Ferrari, a team like McLaren, generally speaking, hasn't had this is new territory for them, is what I'm trying to say. Ferrari has all sorts of different people rotating all the time, let alone since the last time they won a championship. And McLaren has had so much rotation since Lewis won his championship with them. So much rotation. So it's not crazy to believe that maybe everyone, not just Lando, is learning this for the first time, is learning how to really compete. And a team like Mercedes, when they do get the car, and they are starting to really get the car, you can kind of start to see that Mercedes are still Mercedes. They just haven't had the car. And if you put Mercedes against McLaren, it looks like Mercedes would still come on top, because say what you want, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, on the score sheet, it may look like George Russell is absolutely giving Lewis Hamilton pound town. But let's all be honest here. They've got a tenth or two between them. Even in the race, they were working well as a team. Lewis was kicking it behind it. George, about 1.5 seconds. When it started to rain, Lewis got ahead. But even then, they were still relatively close. Even after pit stops, that's what separated them a bit. But I still think they would have still been close at the end of the race, because their performances are so close and they are so competitive. And they're just such a good pairing. But for some reason, everyone, nobody, oh my God, it's actually crazy. I don't know what to say other than I wish Lando was more ready, because we have a non-championship fight. Like, we have a championship fight is that we can visually see the cars are close together. We can visually see it, but we don't have a championship fight. because we know that Lando, well, we don't know that Lando has been previously in these past few races, in these past 4 or 5 races, he has been throwing away or letting that gap slip. And I'm not sure if you guys have been privy to the gap, or I'm not sure if I've been that privy to the gap, is somewhere in the region of 70 points, 80 points. So the gap is done. Like the gap is done. There's no way Lando is realistically winning this championship without some sort of rocket ship, unless he decides to steal the W11. So the championship is done. But in terms of the constructors, he needs to outscore Verstappen. Verstappen getting P1 is still stopping McLaren from catching significantly quicker in the constructors. And all it takes is for Sergio Perez to get lucky and get some good results, because, you know, Sergio Perez getting a good result is now defined the lucky part, instead of him getting bad results being unlucky. All it takes is that a couple of times with, we know Max is going to grind out a good result. And all of a sudden, look, he's back in the game. And speaking of Max had a phenomenal race, had clearly the third best car, I would say. And, you know, first and second stint were okay. He wasn't really troubling anyone, got overtaken by the McLarens. But in that third stint, really getting the hards up to temperature for one, keeping them there and really extracting everything out the tyre and pushing Lewis to the end. Like that, he was legitimately a threat. At first you thought it was going to be Lando, but it became pretty clear that Lando was nowhere in terms of pace for Lewis Hamilton, and it was Max in the really unconventional tyre. Nobody expected the hard tyres to be used. It was, if you don't have a medium, you're definitely going soft. And, well, you know, everyone's saying Hannah Schmidt is the GOAT, but my goodness. I don't know where she thought that one up, because it worked. It actually worked. I know they didn't get the win, but in my book, that is a very job well done. I don't know what more they could have really asked for. If they got the win, that would have been a dang near miracle after the performance of that car the whole weekend. They just didn't really seem on the pace. You know, Max had some outings in qualifying. He had some outings in practice. Sergio Perez was nowhere, as usual, I guess. But it really did look like a Singapore-esque weekend for Red Bull, in terms of, you kind of just wonder what's going on. Like, really, where is the pace? And this is meant to be a good track for them as well. Well, it was meant to be a good track for them. But unlike Singapore, they managed to pull it out, and they managed to get a race result, at least for Max, that is very much to be proud of. Sergio, however, Sergio is on the chopping block. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, Sergio Perez, and maybe another video. But Sergio Perez is definitely, he's counting the days. Or he's trying to make the days count, because they might be coming to an end very soon. In fact, I made like 6 videos or 5 videos on detailing exactly why I don't think Sergio Perez should have got the contract, and why him getting a contract was a travesty. But, well, let's see if Red Bull listen to me.